Fionn and the Fire Demon of Tara. Now that Fionn was a trained warrior and accomplished poet, and had acquired the wisdom of the Salmon of Knowledge, he set out for the High King of Tara's fort. To become the leader of the Fianna, the elite army of the kings of Ireland. Fionn's father, Cúil, had once been captain of the Fianna, so Fionn felt the position was his right, his destiny. On the road to Tara, with all the bronze and ivory chariots filled with warriors, chieftains and kings, they were all travelling to the High King of Ireland, who had invited them to dine at his table for Samhain, the festival to mark the end of the harvest season and the coming of winter. Fionn arrived at the king's fort and left his weapons outside, as it was customary, because Samhain was a time of peace across the land. Fionn joined the throne, heading for the king's great hall, and took a place at one of the tables, and soon the mead was flowing from silver horns, platters were crackling with roast venise, and it was all devoured, and the king's hounds fought for the bones. At the top of the table, Fionn saw the High King, and on his right side, a one-eyed warrior. Fionn knew this was Gaul, the man who had killed his father and had become leader of the Fianna. The sight of his father's murderer made Fionn furious, but he kept it under control, knowing that disturbing the feast would mean an end to his invitation. The great hall was alive with sound of conversation, laughter, and merriment. But as the night drew in, unexpected silence descended on the festivities. Fionn asked the men beside him to explain what was happening, but they shushed him, and nodded towards the table where the king was rising to speak.
"Kings, chieftains, and fellow mortals," he said, "I welcome you to Tara. All day we have feasted on fine meat and wine, but as darkness falls, the food and the drink leave a bitter taste in our mouths, for we know what is coming."
Fionn looked around, dumbfounded. Was he the only one who didn't know what was going on? Luckily, the king explained.
Samhain, as you all know, is a time of year when the veil between the worlds of men and spirits becomes so thin that the dead come to haunt us, and every year the fire demon called Aelin from the flaming breath returns from the other world to seek revenge on us men for driving his people, the Tuatha Down, underground. He wreaks havoc on our fort, burning it to the ground, and each year we have to build it anew.
A shiver ran down Fionn's spine. Spears, swords, and anything else from the world of men he could handle. But otherworldly creatures was a different matter. The Tuatha Down were a treacherous force who fought not only with blades but with magic. The thoughts of this demon scared him, so much that a single monster could not be stopped. Didn't the king have the best weapons and druids and warriors at his disposal? As if reading his mind, the king continued.
Though many have tried to stop Aelin, none have succeeded, for this Prince of Fire plays music on an enchanting harp, lulling to sleep anyone who hears it.
Some of the men looked at each other, nodding, as if they'd experienced the enchantment personally.
If anyone can overcome this demon, he shall have whatever riches he asks.
The king looked around the room expectantly, but no one volunteered. The king shook his head and went to sit down, but in an instant Fionn rose from his seat and said, "I'll bring you the head of this creature." The king squinted his eyes at the fair-haired youth standing before him.
"Who are you, boy?"
"I am Fionn, the son of Cúil." A collective gasp could be heard in the hall, for many men had been friends with Fionn's father and all had heard of the rumors that he might have a child. Nobody, however, was more surprised than Gaul, whose face went pale as the moon. Had this boy come to claim the leadership of the Fianna to avenge his father's death?
"Stopping Aelin of the Flaming Breath is not easy, boy," said the king. "But if anyone can do it, the son of Cool can. For your father was a great man, and much loved within these walls."
Fionn looked at Gaul, and the man cast him a single eye, and then looked at the floor. Spurred on by the king's words, Fionn left the great hall, retrieved his weapons, and began to pace the high earthen ditch surrounding the king's fort. "I was a friend of your father's," said a voice. Fionn turned to find an older man behind him. "I bring you a gift, boy, to help you." And the man showed him a spear, the head of which was covered with a leather sheath. "I already have a spear," said Fionn. "All your weapons are useless for what you're about to face tonight." Fionn took the spear. Its haft was made of rowan, darkened by age and polished by many hands. When Fionn took off the leather, he was surprised to find the head was not made of iron, but bronze. "Only a Tuatha Down spear can kill a Tuatha Down demon," said the old man. Fionn raised it above his shoulder and found that it was perfectly balanced, as if it had been made for him. "It belonged to your father, Fionn," explained the old man. "If you've had this spear in your possession for all these years," wondered Fionn, "why have you not tried to kill Aileen yourself?" "Because I do not know how to use it. Rumor has it that you have the knowledge of many things, Fionn." Fionn knew he was referring to the salmon of knowledge that he had attained when he was younger. He looked at the bronze spearhead and the golden rivets that shone in the moonlight, and Fionn went to thank the old man, but he was gone, completely vanished. "I wonder," thought Fionn. He put the thumb that he had scorched his finger on as a child from the salmon of knowledge into his mouth, and immediately a rush of noise and image and thought filled his mind, the magic of the salmon filling him. He knew everything and nothing all at once. He knew how to use the spear to kill Aileen of the flaming breath. He looked around. Though the gates were now closed and the fort was guarded by the king's men, Fionn knew none of them would stop Aileen getting in. The sounds of chatter could be heard faintly in the great hall, and beyond it, Tara stretched out like a silver blanket under the moon. And all the while Fionn waited and waited. When he was beginning to wonder if Aileen would turn up at all, he heard a distant plucking of a harp, and he felt sleepy. And yet his heart beating wildly with fear and excitement. If he succeeded in tonight's task, he would demand nothing from the king, except his right. But if he failed, he would lose everything, including his father's good name. He could not fail. Everything hinged on this magical spear before him, and it was time to put it to the test. He placed the point of the spear on his forehead, pressing it to his skin until it drew blood. But when it did, the sleepiness immediately stopped. Clarity returned to him. The harp grew louder and closer, and Fionn watched as guards crumpled at the fort. But he didn't remove the spear from his forehead. The music reached the king's gate. The last of the noises of the great hall disappeared. The fort's gate swung open, and there stood Aileen of the flaming breath, prince of the Tuatha Down, carrying a silver harp. He was taller than human, with flaming red hair that hung in curls all around his pointed ears, and his mouth was slightly open, and inside it fire danced on his lips. His eyes burned red like two hot coals, and his whole body glowed. He seemed surprised to see Fionn awake, watching him. Fionn decided to use the element of surprise to his advantage, rushed at the beast with the magical spear, and thrumming to life in his hands. When he reached the demon, Aileen blasted fiery breath from him, but Fionn rolled under it. He felt the heat of the fire on his back, but rolled to the other side unharmed, coming up into a standing position in front of the monster. But Aileen could only release another inferno. Fionn thrust the spear into the demon's body. The beast squealed in pain and stumbled backwards out of the gate, liquid fire dripping from his wounds instead of blood. With a final roar of agony, Aelin turned tail and rushed out of the gate, leaving a trail of fiery blood behind him. Fionn had saved Tara, but that wasn't enough. He promised the king the demon's head. He followed the trail of fire, and soon caught sight of the injured creature that was heading for the grassy hill. As he got closer and closer, a door in the mound opened, releasing a beam of green magical light, and Fionn knew that if the demon escaped through the threshold, he would be in the Tuatha Down with magical healing. And Aelin and the monster would return to Tara in full vengeance the next Samhain. So following the creature, he knew he couldn't catch the demon before he reached safely. Fionn raised the magical spear above his head. He could feel it vibrating with energy, like a bird about to take flight. Fionn released the spear, letting it fly from his hand into the night, swirling, whooshing, swerving around the trees, bushes, with a magical energy, trying to find its target, and with a cry in the distance. A cry from Aelin of the flaming breath. He crashed to the ground, light dimming immediately, and then the other world closed and disappeared. Aelin still on the hill of Tara. All thanks to a magical spear and Fionn's knowledge. Never again would Samhain be ruined for the king. With a mighty swing of his sword, Fionn removed the demon's head, brought it back to Tara, where everyone had awoken, delighted not to find the royal enclosure on fire. "As promised, Fionn McCool," said the king, "you name your reward." "I ask for two things," said Fionn, kneeling. "Firstly, as a son of Cool, I want to take my rightful place as the captain of the Fianna. And second, I wish to avenge my father and challenge Gaul to a fight to the death." The one-eyed warrior stiffened, putting his hand on the hilt of his sword. The king thought about the request for a long time. "I can grant one of your wishes, but not the other. You are indeed the rightful leader of the Fianna, and you may become its captain on the condition that you allow Gaul MacMorna to live. Though he has wronged your family, he has been a loyal servant to me, and I will not see him needlessly killed. He shall leave Tara and become the head of the Connaught branch of the Fianna, so your paths will never cross again. What you say this, Gaul MacMorna?" The one-eyed warrior bowed his head in acceptance. "And what say you, Fionn McCool?" Fionn too bowed his head and said, "I accept your majesty." And from that day on, Fionn McCool became not only the leader of the Fianna, but the greatest warrior it ever had.